In this video, we are going to go over how to solve simple equations. So let's look at our first example. Here we have x minus 18 is equal to negative 1. When you are trying to solve an equation, that means you are trying to isolate the variable and figure out what value of that variable is going to make this equation true. So our first step is going to be to identify the variable we are trying to get by itself. In this problem, that variable is that x right there. We want to isolate that x and get it by itself on one side of the equal sign. Move everything else to the other side so that we can solve. Once we've identified what the variable is we're trying to solve, we can then move on to what is keeping that variable from being alone. In this problem, that minus 18 right there is what is preventing my variable from being by itself. So in order to get rid of a minus 18, we need to do the opposite of minus. So the operation that undoes subtraction is addition. So we want to add 18. If we add 18 to the left side of that equation, we also have to add 18 to the right side of the equation to keep it in balance. So when we do that, here we're left with an x then we have a minus 18 plus 18. That's going to simplify to a 0, so that cancels out. And over there on the right, we have a negative 1 plus 18, which is going to give us a 17. So we've identified our variable. That was what was highlighted in x. Our second step was to identify what we needed to do to isolate it. And then our third step, we had to actually perform that operation. That's where we added that 18 to both sides. And then our final answer can come in step 4. What was our final answer? We arrived at an x equals 17. So all we have to do is circle our final answer, and we're ready to move on to another example. Let's look at a second example. In this example, we have 0 is equal to negative 2 plus x. Again, our first step is we need to identify what is the variable we're trying to solve for. What variable are we trying to isolate? We are trying to isolate that x right there. What is preventing that x from being by itself? That negative 2 is what is preventing our variable from being alone. How do we fix that? How do we undo a subtract 2? We have to add 2. If we add 2 to one side of the equation, we have to add 2 to the other side to keep our equation in balance. So when we do that, on the left we have a 0 plus 2, that's 2, is equal to a negative 2 plus 2 is equal to 0, so that cancels out, leaving us with our x. So our final answer, we have an x is equal to 2. Let's look at another example. Here we have x plus 20 is equal to 32. Same process as before. First we need to identify what variable are we trying to isolate or solve for. That variable would be that x right there. What is preventing him from being by himself? That plus 20 is preventing our variable from being alone. How do we undo a plus 20? We undo addition with subtraction, so we need to subtract 20 from both sides. So when we do that, we have our x. A 20 minus a 20 is equal to 0. That cancels out. We have our equals, and 32 minus 20 is going to give us a 12. So we have our final answer of x is equal to 12. Let's look at a fourth example. Here we have a 5 plus x is equal to negative 11. What variable are we trying to isolate? We're trying to isolate that x. What is preventing him from being by himself? That 5. How do we undo a positive 5? we need to subtract 5. If we subtract 5 from one side of the equation, we have to subtract 5 from the other side as well. So here on the left we have a 5 minus 5, which gives us 0. That cancels out, leaving us with our x is equal to a negative 11 plus a negative 5. So that gives us a negative 16. We've got our final answer. So far, all 4 of our examples have dealt with either addition or subtraction. Not all of your simple equations are going to do that. You will also have some that involve operations besides addition and subtraction. So let's look at some. Here in example 5, we have a 15v is equal to negative 60. The steps are not going to change just because our operations have. We first need to figure out what are we trying to solve for. Well, we're trying to solve for that v. What is preventing that v from being by himself? That times 15 that is attached to him. How do we undo multiplication by 15? You undo multiplication using division. So we need to divide both sides by 15. When we do that, 15 divided by 15 gives us 1, so that's going to cancel, leaving us with our v by itself is equal to a negative 60 divided by 15, which gives us a negative 4. And we have our final answer. Let's look at a 6th example. Here we have a negative 320 is equal to negative 20. Same steps. Identify what you're trying to solve for. I'm trying to solve for that x. What is preventing him from being by himself? That negative 20 right there. How do you undo multiplication? You need to divide. So we need to divide both sides by negative 20. On the left, we have negative 320 divided by negative 20. That's going to give us a positive 16. And over on the right, we have a negative 20x divided by negative 20. Negative 20 divided by negative 20 is a 1, so it is going to cancel out, leaving us with our x by itself. So we have our final answer of x is equal to 16. Let's look at another example. In this example, looks a little bit different yet again. Here we have a 5 is equal to an n divided by 11. Looks scary and evil because it's a fraction, but all a fraction really is division. So, same steps as before. What are we trying to solve for? We're trying to solve for that n. We want to get it by itself. What is preventing it from being by itself? That divide by 11 is preventing it. How do we undo division? We need to multiply. So we would need to multiply both sides by 11. Over on the right, on the left, we have a 11 times 5, which is a 55. Then over here on the right, we have our n divided by 11 times an 11. So we have a fraction times not a fraction. Well, let's just make our second part a fraction. Let me change color. I'm matching here. 11 is the same thing as 11 over 1. Now we have a fraction times a fraction. So we have our 11 over 11 cancels out, and we are left with our n. Final answer of n is equal to 55. Let's look at one last example. Here we have a negative 3 is equal to an x divided by 20. What are we trying to solve for? We're trying to solve for that x. What is preventing that x from being by itself? That divide by 20. How do you undo division? You use multiplication. So we're going to multiply by 20. on both sides. So if we multiplied the right by 20, we need to also multiply the left by 20. Having some technical difficulties with my pen here. So 20 times negative 3 is a negative 60. Wrong color. Negative 60 is equal to, here we have an x divided by 20 times 20, so our 20 divided by 20 is going to cancel out, leaving us with our x. So we have our final answer of x is equal to negative 60. I hope this video helped answer your questions about how to solve simple equations.